The film starts with archival footage of famous black figures, discussing their opposition to the Vietnam War, stating that, black men are forced to fight for a country that discriminates them, and killing innocent people that they have no qualms with. Now, somewhere in Ho Chi Minh City, 4 old friends and GIs, the Bloods, where are Paul, Otis, Eddie, and Melvie, reunite after a long absence apart. Their goal is to find the remains of their squad leader, named Stormin Norman Holloway, and to find a hidden cache of gold, with the intent of bringing Norman home for a proper burial. The men gather in a bar and catch up. Paul is staunchly conservative and expresses anti-immigrant and pro-Trump statements. They are met by their guide, named as Vin, who will take them through the jungle, where they will find Norman's remains. As they leave the bar, a one-legged teen throws firecrackers and mocks the GIs. A flashback shows the Bloods as their chopper flies toward their destination, the site of a CIA plane crash. They are shot down by Viet Cong allies, and their chopper crashes. The Bloods come out and engage in a firefight with the enemy, and kill them all. They enter the plane and discover the huge cache of gold bars. They were given to the Lahu people to aid the Viet Cong in the fight, so Norman proposes to the other men that they bury the gold and go back for it later, claiming to their superiors that the VC already got it, and keep the gold for themselves, as a message to them for forcing them to fight their war. Otis meets with his former lover, called as Tien, as she is acting as the middle woman between the Bloods and a French businessman named Isroche, who is intent on purchasing the gold from them. A young woman named Michonne comes in and greets Tien, who introduces her to Otis. He is quick to realize that she is his daughter with Tien. After Michonne exits, Tien mentions how the girl was ridiculed as a child for her mixed heritage. Michonne later asks Tien about Otis as well, but Tien doesn't feel that they need to be involved in each other's lives. The Bloods join Tien as they meet with Desroche, who is trying to make his own negotiations in purchasing the gold from the men. Paul argues with Desroche over his offers, but they all reach an agreement. Later, the guys are surprised to find Paul's son David, who has shown up after learning his father was taking the trip. Paul and David have always had a rocky relationship, and Paul is none too pleased at the thought of having to split his cut with David. The Bloods travel with Vin across the river towards rural Vietnam. David chats with Otis, who says that Paul was never the same after Norman died. They both claim to have heard Paul call his name in his sleep. Another flashback shows how close the two of them were, not only as soldiers, but as friends. The 5 men had gathered around to listen to the radio and heard the report of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Despite their collective anger and distress, Norman keeps them all from getting too reckless. On the river, a merchant tries to sell the man a chicken, but him getting too close to Paul triggers his PTSD, and he reacts aggressively toward the merchant. The merchant in turn yells that Paul killed his parents. The other men calm Paul down, but he admits that he has been seeing Norman talking to him at night as he sleeps. The group stops at a hotel and later go to the bar. David meets a French woman named Hetty, who operates an organization called LAM that defuses bombs and landmines. She works with her 2 friends, Simon and Seppo. The men have to leave after Melvin drunkenly makes a fool of himself. The next morning, Vin drives the men near the area where they had buried the gold. The land has since been eroded over time and has made it harder for the men to remember where they buried it. The men walk for a while, but stop to set up camp for the night. They find a gun among Otis's possessions that was given to him by Tien, leading to them becoming suspicious that she might have set them up, but Otis insists it is only for protection. By day, the men continue their journey. David goes to defecate, but ends up digging a bar out of the ground. The men rush over and begin digging, and sure enough, they find the gold. As they continue digging, they eventually find Norman's tags and his bones. Paul weeps over his remains and leads the other men in prayer. On the way back to the rendezvous point with Vin, the Bloods start arguing over how they are going to divide their shares. Eddie gets fed up and tries to get them to love one another, but he accidentally steps on a landmine, blowing him in half. In the ensuing panic, David steps on another landmine, but he doesn't set it off. Hetty, Simon, and Seppo then arrive and offer to help. Using an old tactic from a past experience, the Bloods get a rope to tie around David and have everyone pull hard. They succeed in pulling him off the mine before it blows up. However, Paul orders the others to tie the LAM people up due to his continued paranoia. He keeps them there throughout the night, where Hetty tries to make an attempt to get out by flirting with David, but Paul catches this before David is fooled. Seppo manages to run away and disappear. The following day, the Bloods make their way to the rendezvous point, but are found by a group of gunmen who have captured Seppo and are demanding the gold in exchange for him, claiming it is rightfully theirs. The men get in a shootout, where David gets shot in the leg, and Seppo tries running away, but is blown up by a landmine. After the gunmen flee, Vin says that Desroche may have double-crossed them, so they should make their way to a nearby temple for defenses, while Otis suggests calling Yen for help. Paul thinks she's the one who betrayed them, but when he sees that nobody else will continue to follow his lead, he sets off with his share of gold and heads off into the jungle by himself, crying and yelling out prayers. Afterwards, the others tend to David's wound. Otis offers Vin Hetty's share of the gold, at which point, Hetty says she and Simon want in as recompense for Seppo's death. On the other hand, Paul continues into the jungle, weary and growing delusional, and speaking in monologues, where he claims that God told Paul to forget his friends and look out for himself. Meanwhile, the rest of the group makes it to the temple for shelter. David expresses his poor relationship with Paul to Hetty. Elsewhere, other gunmen find the bodies of their own men and set off to kill those responsible. In other scene, Paul gets his leg caught on a root and falls, causing him to lose his gold. He leaves it and continues walking. He then hallucinates that he sees Norman standing before him with the gut shot that killed him. Another flashback shows that Norman was accidentally shot by Paul when an enemy attacked them, and Paul had fired at him, but the gunfire struck Norman. Paul has felt guilty about it ever since, but Norman's vision embraces him and tells him to let go of his guilt. The other gunmen then find Paul and force him to dig his grave and tell them where the gold is. He simply speaks in prayer and raises his arms, leading the other men to fill him with bullets. Desroche and his men arrive at the temple to make the exchange. He assures the men that Tien had nothing to do with the gunmen being involved. After realizing he tried to have them killed, Otis and Hetty give Desroche a heavy bag that is just filled with rocks. A gunfight ensues, with the Bloods managing to kill Desroche's men. Desroche throws a grenade, which Melvin jumps on to save his friends, as it blows up. Desroche is about to shoot Otis, but David shoots him in the face first. Vin helps the Bloods, plus Hetty and Simon, who get out and cash in the gold. They also return Norman's remains to his sisters, as they had promised, and he is given the burial which he deserved. Melvin's widow gets his share of the cash, while Hetty's share goes to a Black Lives Matter organization. Hetty and Simon donate their share to Lamb, in honor of Seppo. Otis rejoins Jen and decides to get to know Michonne. David reads a letter from Paul, where he expresses regret for how he treated him and for not being a better father. He mentions how Norman always taught the other Bloods to lead with love, and he assures David that he really did love him. And from here, friends, this is the end of this recap. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Now I'm taking rest, and we'll catch up you soon. But before I leave, please like, subscribe and share my channel. Thank you.